Good afternoon. First of all, it's a great honor to speak after Professor Meshulam. My God, no, I must have done something right in my life to be doing this. I assume that many of you recognize the picture of this woman. This is Rosa Parks. And Rosa Parks is remembered forever and ever to be the first black woman who refused to give her seat to a white man in a public bus in Montgomery in 1955. But Rosa Parks was not the first one to do so. In fact, she was the third woman to refuse to give her seat. But we remember her as a symbol for a civil rights movement. I believe that you recognize the picture of this young woman, Anne Frank. Around the world, when you say Holocaust, more people would say Anne Frank as someone who symbolizes through her diary, through her home, what we mean, the Holocaust. But behind Anne Frank, there are 6 million other Jews, most of whom we have no idea what their names were. My name is Vinitzky Seroussi. I'm from the Department of Sociology, and I study collective memory and commemoration for more years than I'm willing to admit. But what I'm really interested is how societies cope with their difficult past and shameful moments. And we all know that all of our nations, no matter where you came from, have some shameful moments that we have hard time to cope with. So collective memory in many ways is not really about the past, but about many current controversies. Let me give you just quick 3 examples. The first one takes us to the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. A year ago, there was a major controversy there whether to tear down the statue of General Lee, the commander of the Confederate Army. Within, there were 2 demonstrations taking place on that day in Charlottesville, at the end of which a young woman from the liberal side of that fence was killed. The Polish law. A few weeks ago, we woke up one morning and understood that the Polish government makes many restrictions on what can be said and researched on the roles Poles plays during the Holocaust. Not an easy situation. And the third event took place, in fact, in this very hotel, when some 15 years ago, General Rehavam Ze'evi, who was at the time a minister at the government, was killed by a Palestinian. Major controversies over whether and if to commemorate him, both because of his extreme right-wing views that were on the verge of illegitimate, and second, because there were many new revelations about his misconduct, to say the very least, towards women. So even, when we are here, we can kind of argue about collective memory. So collective memory is not just about the way we were, but in many ways, it is about the way we are. It's about our identity, our dreams, about the way we perceive our life, our vision, and our future. The notion of memory is especially pertinent for the Jewish religion and people. Zachor, as we know from the commandment, "Thou shalt remember the Sabbath," or "Thou shalt remember what Amalek did to you," is one of, I would say, of the organizing principle of Judaism. In many ways, people say that Judaism is a community of memory. If you can recall the Passover evening, after you are done with all the fighting, who's doing what and where we're going to meet, you sit with the entire, family and friends, and you tell stories about the past, about the moment in which we became people. We narrate our past through special food, through special games, through special songs, and in that way, in a very lively way, we basically tell the story, our memory, to the next generation. But the notion of memory is not just our business. And the issue of collective memory became an extremely big thing towards the end of the 19th century, because this is when many nations are being emerged. And the new nations and the new regime ask their new citizens to do 2 things that most people don't really like to do. They ask them to pay taxes, the IRS, if you didn't recognize this logo, and they ask them, more than paying tax, they ask them to sacrifice their life, When you go on your way from this hotel up to Mount Scopus to the ceremony this afternoon, please take a look on your left. You'll see this British cemetery, military cemetery, that was one of the very first ones to build in this form right after World War I. And in fact, the Israeli military cemeteries follow this model, and it's a very democratic model about which I won't elaborate at the moment. But the important thing is that those new nations ask the new citizens to pay taxes and to sacrifice their life. And the citizens look at each other and say, what do we have in common with those new tribes? We barely speak the same language. And collective memory and a sense of a shared past becomes to be the glue that makes people willing to do those two acts. So when we are celebrating now the Hebrew University 100 years, we are looking back, but we're also looking forward. So my question, and I'm going to use the rest of my time during this short talk, is to ask, what does it take to be remembered? If we want to make sure that someone very important to us, whether in an event or a specific individual, we want to make sure that we will remember him or her 10 years, 100 years from now, what does it take to be remembered? So first of all, it takes time. And when I say time, I mean having an official day in the calendar. For example, an official day, a memorial day for the Holocaust, or a memorial day for the fallen soldiers. And why is that important? First of all, because the education system uses this opportunity to educate the future citizens of the nation. But in addition, this whole process enables a conversation. And let me give you an example from my own home. When my daughters were young, one of them is already a graduate of this university, but when they were young, sometimes they would remind me that they need a white shirt for the following day because they need to go to school and they need on those memorial days to come with a white shirt. Sometimes I reminded them, sometimes they reminded me. So while we're preparing, and of course the usual chores at home, you can tell me 2 days ago, why always it has to be at the end, the last minute, where am I going to find now a white shirt? I don't have time to iron. I have a career at the Hebrew University I have to maintain, and so on and so forth. While doing this, it's also an opportunity to tell a personal story, to bring up a personal memory that would tie to the national and to the collective memory. So we can tell a story of a friend we lost in the army, or we can tell a story about parts of our family that we lost in the Holocaust, and so on and so forth. The second dimension is the notion of the space. To have a place where we have a monument that we can gather and cherish and remember the past together. This picture is a picture of an extremely interesting site on the Mall in Washington. I'm sure many of you know the monument for the Vietnam War, which was an extremely controversial war for Americans. Many were for, many were against, but they can all meet in that monument and share a narrative. When we speak about mnemonic space, we also have to remember that nowadays, and Yuval Noah Harari mentioned it during his talk, that the virtual space is also going to play a very important part in the way we construct our collective memory. So this is something to be thinking about as we think about our research in the future. The third dimension, and we have 5, not 50, just 5, are the agents of memory, because behind every monument, there are architects. Behind every history books, there are people who actually wrote the books. But one of the most important categories of agents of memory for people beyond high school are movie directors, because much of what we know about the past comes from movies. So you can take a quick 3 looks at, the Schindler List by Spielberg. So many people around the world know about the Holocaust because they saw that movie and that's what they know. So we better take a good look at those cultural products. Life is Beautiful by Benini, and a very recent movie, Jackie, by Pablo Larraín, pushes a thesis that if it wouldn't be for Jackie Kennedy and the kind of decisions she made moments after the assassination, when she's still in shock, she said that he needs to be buried in Arlington. Placing Kennedy in Arlington rather than in the family estate in Massachusetts may contribute tremendously to the fact that Kennedy stayed at the heart of the American nation. But throughout this movie, Pablo Larraín is doing yet another move of memory, because he himself becomes Jackie Kennedy, agent of memory, because now we are exposed to her story too. The fourth dimension is the notion of the institutionalization. To sustain and maintain a memory, certainly in the digital era, when young generation are interested in interactive activities, we need a lot of money. And I can give you just 2 examples of brand new museums, really cutting edge in the field. I highly recommend you to go to there. I drag my family all over the place to see, you know, mnemonic museums. So much for the fun this family gets. So on this is my left and this is my right, you can see the Museum Pauline in Warsaw that narrates the story of the Jewish community prior, during, and after the Holocaust, while on the other side, you can see the new museum in Washington, the Museum for the Culture and History of African American. This is a museum about which there was 100 years of controversy, and no doubt, talk about agents of memory, it was opened during Obama's term. The fifth dimension is the notion of the culture. When we look for a theme that we want to commemorate, it better has a good fit with the culture of the commemorated society. If you're looking at this building, I'm not going to do here a quiz, but I suspect that most of you do not know what building is. This is on 16 Rothschild Boulevard in Tel Aviv. And this building hosted one of the most important moments of this nation. This is what David Ben-Gurion said, "Here we thereby declare." And this building has been totally deteriorated for close to 70 years. And one of my recent researches has to do with this puzzle. How come the place, you know, Israel being really occupied with nation building and its independence, how come this place has been so deteriorated and neglected? Part of my answer, it's not the whole answer, this is a different lecture, part of my answer has to do with the fact that nobody died in this building. And there was no war that took place here. And when death is one of the organizing principles, it's a problem to do something about it. So when we go back to Anne Frank and Rosa Parks, these 2 women had the 5 necessary elements to make sure they will stay as part of our collective memory. They had special time, special space, agents of memory, institutions, and culture. But if you think that once you put a monument or your name somewhere, this is it, I've got news. Collective memory is an extremely dynamic process. Things may change because culture may change. Its agents of memory may lose power. Take a look at Abraham Lincoln. When he was assassinated, he was an extremely controversial figure in America. He barely made the election 6 months before. But 60 years later, when the generation that went through the Civil War was already dead, and the American nation is looking up for a figure that will inspire it right before it enters World War I, they turn to Lincoln and make him its unifying father. When I look at Rabin, which at the moment is an extremely controversial figure, relatively controversial figure, I think that 40 years from now, he may stand a chance to become kind of a Ben-Gurion of the Israeli nation. In fact, when I compare his biography to other people's biography, he has a very impressive biography. His biography, of course, won't be changed, but Israeli society may change, agents of memory may change, the status of the conflict may change, and so on and so forth. So collective memory is an extremely dynamic thing. Just to conclude, you know, our past and our collective memory is extremely important because it's part of who we are. And if we are losing it, you know, both on a personal level as well as on a collective level, we may face a problem. But what we really need to do is look towards the future and not to forget to also enjoy the present. Thank you very much.